Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in a couple minutes, and we're just going to wait for folks to trickle in. Hello. Okay, I think that's about everybody. So welcome, everyone, to #Peace Talks. I'm John with Peace Direct. So if this is your first time at this event, #Peace Talks is a series of events featuring heroic peace builders sharing stories of hope and empowering people to affect change in their own communities. Today is a special edition of #Peace Talks focused on youth peace builders that are making a huge impact on their respective communities and the world. So a big thanks to our staff, all of our student allies that are on the call today, and all of you for joining us. A little bit about Peace Direct if you're not familiar with us. So we work with local people to stop violent conflict and build lasting peace. For over 15 years, working with peace building partners in some of the most difficult conflicts around the world. Places where ongoing wars have ripped communities apart and where local people are working every day to rebuild the peace. Tonight, we are absolutely honored to welcome two amazing youth peace builders, Afini and Matias Lara, who will be sharing their inspiring stories of resilience and hope. Then we'll open it up to the audience and have a Q&A. Please submit questions via the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom window. We also invite everyone to join the conversation on Twitter, #PeaceTalks @PeaceDirect. Now I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Christine Trelana.
Hi, everyone. So around the world, young people have proven themselves as leaders and movement builders for climate justice, racial equality, and human rights. But because of their age, they're often dismissed as inexperienced and labeled as the problem by those in power. They are even targeted for their activism, with 1 in 4 young people around the world living in conflict-affected areas. With this Peace Talks, Peace Direct raises awareness of youth, peace, and security, and with your support, continues to help young people building peace. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First off, we have Afeni Evans, pronouns she, her, hers. Afeni is an abolitionist in training. She is an anti-war and anti-imperialist Army veteran dedicated to fighting for Black liberation and non-violent community safety. She is a core member of Freedom Fighters DC, a Black-led grassroots organization that focuses on Black liberation, mutual aid, and political education. She is also a community organizer for the Working Families Party and a D-Fund fellow working to dismantle police violence in DC. Next up, we have Matias Lara, a youth human rights activist who is a part of Nuestra Agenda, Juventudes por la Paz, and the Climate Reality Project. He is also a member of the core coordination team of the Youth Engagement Program, sponsored by the Club of Rome and Penn State University. And now finally, I would like to introduce Peace Direct's very own Scoville Fellow, Shannon Page, who has the fun job of moderating the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So, today I have the ultimate privilege of speaking with Afini, Matias, and just learning a little bit more about what it means for them to be community-led peace builders. And so, to start off with, we heard a little bit about your bios, but I would love it if we could hear how both of you came to this form of community-led peace building.
Okay, I guess I go first. Hi, like they said, I'm Afini. I am, I'm a military veteran, so that also informs a lot of my activism. And I got to be where I am through just really educating myself and being a part of a greater community of activists that have decided that it's more important to dismantle police violence and create real peace in our streets that comes from resources than it is to, continue to live our regular lives. So I am so grateful to be here. I'm grateful to share space with all of you guys. And yeah, so that's a piece of it.
Hi, everyone. As it was said, my name is Matias Lara. I'm from Santiago del Estero in the north of Argentina. I'm 31 and I've been a human rights activist and a peace builder a human rights activist since I was 18, so it's like 13 years from now. And working in the youth peace and security agenda like for the past 2 years or so. Really happy to be here sharing with you all.
Thank you both for those brief introductions. I think one thing that I admire both about you is that you have experience in more formalized institutions. I know, Afini, you were in the military, and then Matthias, you were involved in a number of relatively organized structures, and then now you're in these movements that are really horizontally led and are so youth-led as well. And I was wondering if you could speak to some of the differences between some of your past experiences and these really organized formal structures and these newer structures that are co-created and co-led.
So just a little bit of background on me. Before I decided to be an activist and step into this form of like political engagement, I was a political science major and I wanted to be a policy advisor. So I saw a lot more faith in our institutions before, especially because I was a military veteran, especially because I'm also like an Army brat, like my entire family is military. So my view of America and the way that our institutions are set up was very idealistic in hindsight. And now, being in a space where we are working to dismantle the hierarchies that are created by white supremacy, where we're working to create a more equitable and diverse space that is, Black-led, that is multiracial, that is multi-generational, that is centered around anti-racism and compassion. And through those experiences, I've learned that learning how to be more imaginative and creative in the way that I think, in the way that I present myself and the way I interact with others is that same creativity and that same imagination that it's going to take for us to get to a more nonviolent world in which where we're not dealing with state violence and police violence in our streets. And we also don't have the constant cycle of violence in our neighborhoods here in Black America. So.
Thank you so much, Matthias.
Okay, I would say that in really formal structured organizations, what you get a lot, it's single, only one way of telling the stories. Really vertical institutions have this one word and one vision of things as they should be. And when you start like in more horizontal structures and trying to have everyone sitting on the table and hearing everyone's voices, you just kind of learn how to see things from multiple perspectives. Like I've worked in the government for several years, and there's like this one side of the story and not much room for I mean, people who aren't willing to share your vision. And that brings really a lot of corruption to the structures, but not corruption as we usually hear about, but as the natural aging of institutions. So we have like these 18th or 19th century institutions in the middle of the 21st. And that's something that more horizontal structures, especially when they're youth-led, doesn't share at all.
It's so fascinating listening to you both, because a lot of what you're talking about speaks to things that Peace Direct has been talking about recently, especially following the publication of our report, Time to Decolonize Aid, where, I mean, Matthias, as you said, these structures, these institutions, these norms have been around since the 19th century, and we haven't sat down and thought, okay, well, what values have we inadvertently brought with us from the 19th century, values that we no longer hold? And truly, I mean, Afini, you were talking about, you know, the lack of creativity, the lack of imagination. And our recommendations, we don't phrase it as creativity, as imagination, but we really are inviting these organizations to consider disruptive, bold, and, you know, to use your words, creative ways of engaging with local communities, of engaging with issues like conflict, and moving away from the set structures, moving away from what we believe to know as absolute, and really valuing the perspectives, especially of marginalized communities, especially Black communities and disabled communities and queer communities, and how can we bring them to the fold, bring them to the center when we're having conversations about conflict prevention. So just listening to both of you highlighting these threads, to me, and I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, it really feels like we are in a unique moment. In the past just over a year now, you know, following the murder of George Floyd, that summer in the United States, I was having conversations with people about race and racism and police brutality and the conflict in our own country in a way that I had never anticipated having here in the US. And then I saw similar conversations happening all around the world with the hashtag #EndSARS movement. And all of these movements were youth-led. All of these movements, by and large, aimed to be nonviolent. And it's really fascinating watching this ripple effect, and I would love to know how you both understand yourselves as positioned within this larger wave of change that's going on, or whether you even feel like this is a larger wave.
Let me go first on this one. First of all, I find really interesting the name of the inform you just got out, Decolonizing Aid. It really got me thinking, because it's one of the most difficult exercises we were invited to do while building horizontal structures. I believe that we are all colonized in some way, and we really need to walk out of that. First of all, it's really important to understand that it's not the same to recognize rights to some population than giving up privileges. And that's the first part of all of this. I mean, I do live in Latin America and Argentina, but I'm also a white male heterosexual, and that brings a lot of privileges to my condition. So first thing, it's recognizing the place where you are in order to empathize with the. Well, I'm Argentinian, but I'm also an American because I live in the American country. So that doesn't make people who live in the US the only Americans. It's everyone in the table. So that's the kind of things that we're all forced to recognize. I mean, if there are certain things in usual life you don't recognize as privileges, then you're not doing the exercise. Like I can walk in the middle of the night in my neighborhood and not being afraid of having someone trying to attack my physical integrity. And that is a privilege, and that's not something that's easier to recognize. So I believe that's the first exercise we're forced to do, just asking ourselves what things are common in life to us but not to everyone else. And I believe that's the hardest step, because once you get through that, empathizing, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, I tend to take a more internationalist view to my politic and my activism. I really genuinely feel like all of our problems are intersectional. They are all related. And a lot of them also stem from the same places: America, Britain, Spain, France, like marginalized and oppressed people. They have some of the same enemies, for lack of a better word. So when we have these conversations in America and about, what it looks like to fight anti-Blackness and what it looks like to fight violence, we always have to have bigger conversations of what it looks like to do that globally. Globally, it looks like nobody's starving in a world where we produce enough food to feed 10 billion people a year. Then why do we have billions of people that starve? If globally we cared, then why don't we take a real global hard stance on climate change? Because climate change and everything that it will bring is violence. These are all systems of violence we have to dismantle. So when we have these conversations, we see ourselves in this bigger movement towards ending global oppression. We see ourselves in this bigger movement to end global anti-Blackness, to end global anti-transness, to end global anti-homosexuality, because I don't like to call it homophobia or transphobia. They're not scared. They're just openly oppressing people. So yeah, like that's just kind of how I see it. As all of us and fighting in our global struggle, making sure that we are keeping everybody safe and dismantling all these systems at once.
I mean, there's so many threads from both of you that I want to pick up and delve into. And I want to start by saying thank you, Matthias. I think it's so, so important for us to always be sure to ground ourselves in our own positionality and our own backgrounds and understanding our privileges and the ways that we can use them, to then do what Afini says, which is to keep other people safe. And I feel called by both of your comments to remind ourselves of why we're here. I think we're a peace building organization, and so obviously we talk a lot about conflict, we talk a lot about struggle, we talk a lot about oppression. But Afeni, and I think you said this really, really well, it's like there's no need for people to be hungry in this world. There's no need for oppression to continue. We know better. And so with the grounding of knowing who we are and our skills and the benefit and the privileges that we have, how can we make sure that we get closer to that world? How can we harness ourselves and our communities to making the world safer, more peaceful, and everything that we strive for? And really and truly, I'm called to this idea of safety because I find so often safety requires us to be deeply uncomfortable as well. And so often I've been in conversations, particularly around conflict and violence in the United States, but also once you get into ethnic conflicts, where people don't know, or we're figuring out what it means to be safe and what it means to gauge safety with also needing to put ourselves in less comfortable situations, to be able to push the agenda forward, to be able to speak to people who may not hold the same views as us, to be able to really go to the front lines of whatever the conflict may be and say, hi, I'm Shannon. What is your name? I'm starting to, really dismantle and shed some of the distance between all of these different communities. And so I would just love to hear a bit more from both of you, how you balance this idea of safety with the idea of needing to be bold and keep moving forward, especially both of you coming from communities that have historically, in various ways, been harmed.
I think as we begin to have the conversation about redefining safety and what that looks like, we also need to redefine violence and what that is on a mass scale. Because, our system of incarceration in America is violent. 40% of prisoners being exposed to sexual violence is violent. People not actually being better after being in these facilities, after we spend all of this money to keep them there and to cage them, and for them to not come back with anything that actually benefits them as a human being, that is violence. The starving of our communities and the lack of resources resources in Black communities is violence, because some of the safest communities, especially here in America and probably around the world, have resources. They don't have more police, they don't have more incarceration, they don't have more violence, they have more resources. And so how come it is inherently violent for me to want to dismantle these systems within my community, within my life, but it is okay for you to live in your safe communities without them? So when we talk about, global safety, especially, we talk about American imperialism, we also start to talk about real restitution from countries like America, from countries like France, from countries like Britain, and all of those colonizing countries, restitution and reparations to repair the countries that they have starved, the countries that they have openly and in a very calculated and succinct way have dismantled and destroyed their economies and their humanity. So real safety is establishing humanity once again in these places where it has continuously been lacking. So when I look at it, I definitely see, like I said, an interconnected fight in which we actually dismantle and demilitarize not only our police force here, but also shrink the scope and size and responsibility of our military outside of our borders.
Well, I believe that there's a lot to redefine in the word of safety. I mean, it's not safety to have more guns in hands of the police or the armed forces, as Afini said, but it is safety to bring a high-quality education to as broader audiences as possible. It is safety to bring voices to the places where they are unheard nowadays. It is safety to bring to the youth in the neighborhoods the possibility of growth and not only more police to oppress them every time they're trying to express themselves somehow. And I believe that the first part into it's really questioning our institutions and the role they're having, like in the whole world, and how they are perceived from every single side. I mean, in the neighborhood where I live, police, it's not the arm of safety. Police, it's actually a threat, because whenever police arrives, they usually come to attack people, not to protect them. So that has to do a lot with this redefinition of safety and the role that institutions are playing. Like every time I talk with people from the US, I ask them how do they perceive like institutions like USAID, and USAID in Argentina and most of South America is perceived like the bad guy in the movie, because they usually come to work against indigenous people. For example, they most of their work, it's they usually have like connections with locals that are with the mining companies or with the deforestation companies, and instead of helping to solve the issues, they're making them worse. So that has a lot to do with how we're perceiving this new way of peace building. We have to decolonize and destructure institutions as they are right now, think them from different places, and bring more voices on board.
I really want to shift to the future and think a little bit of I have two young siblings, they're teenage boys, and they're eager to be activists themselves. And so and we have a wonderful question in the chat that I want to loop in, which is from Ntege Juma from Uganda, and apologies if I mispronounced your name, Ntege. But they asked us, they spoke really to Afini, but I think we can broaden the question. As a young Black person, a girl, don't you think that there are many girls from Africa who are in need of the empowerment that you speak of and could learn from the empowerment? And I want to broaden that out a little bit as we think of our youth. How can we, this is a multi-pronged question. Firstly, how can we access our youth. Many young people are online, but may not have the ability to physically get places and be physically present in movements. So how can we draw youth into peace efforts? And then secondly, also, how can we remind youth or remind communities that youth have fundamental power and skills and talents and untapped potential? And so really, when we're looking to the future, when we're looking to the longevity of these movements, how can we make sure that we keep drawing in new people who are able to keep us moving forward and challenging even the ideas that the three of us have and keeping us, moving forward?
So I think within accessing the youth, like the youth is already active. Like they are very, very active. Like the fact that TikTokers can like literally shut down, some politicians like events, that there are Redditors that can take over the global economy within 12 hours. Like the youth is involved. The youth are they're looking for ways to, fight back against the system that they know aren't really working for any of us. But I think that now that we've mobilized people, especially around some of these other issues that are a little more surface, it's time to organize people and their minds around, what it looks like to fight back against oppression. So that looks like, again, like I was saying, like doing like the global connection of the struggle, always raising awareness and keeping the conversation focused on the things that are most important, not only online, but locally within your neighborhoods, making sure that when you are having these conversations with people that you don't necessarily agree with, that you are communicating in a way in which, you're strong in your ideals. If you are somebody that believes in human rights, there should be nothing that anybody can say to you that would make you feel otherwise, or that would make you feel as though, that your ideas aren't, right and morally sound. I have my favorite saying is, do what's right, don't do what's legal. There are a lot of things that are legal that aren't necessarily morally right, but we all know, fundamentally as human beings, what the right thing is to do. And so we do have digital campaigns. I always encourage young people to start organizations within their neighborhoods globally. It's like young girls in Uganda, if they're facing oppression from patriarchy or from anti-Blackness that is brought on by colonization, then how do we start to connect our struggles? How do we start to have those conversations and move our actions forward towards liberation? And you do that through collective action and through collective struggle, knowing that you're not alone in a lot of these struggles, knowing that you are human first, and you deserve to be treated like you have value. So how do we redefine where who has value where? How do we redefine who actually has power and what power actually looks like? And having those conversations within our neighborhoods as well. So hopefully that answers the question. But that's like my general idea around that.
More than. Matthias, what do you think? How do we draw in our youth? How do we keep them motivated? How do we keep them active and give them access to all the movements that are happening?
Well, first of all, I mean, this is like really a local look, because I do have to say that we don't have the same participation privileges than the ones you have in the US. I mean, like youth are for sure a lot less heard over here than over there. So first of all, and that even happens in most of youth-led organizations, because most of the times what they're trying to do is to resemble the older generations institutions. Like we want to be a serious institution. We're going to make an institution like the UN. And no, there is already a UN, so why would we and youth is already not heard over there, so why would we make another institution like that? I believe that first of all, it's creating and thinking in spaces where youth actually develops their regular life. Last year, we've started having like a series of webinars and trying to youth to get engaged with several daily problems and related to the sustainable development goals. But we found that there was quite a little participation. So we started to think about how we could actually get youth engaged, and we started to make these youth focused campaigns, and we started like publishing memes on our social media, and they started to have a lot more engaging. And I believe that one of the most worthful experiences we had was this freestyle hip hop tournament around human rights. And I mean, the very first instance of this freestyle tournament we made had 10 times more interactions in social media than, I mean, the best of our webinars. So that really brought us a message. If you want youth to participate, you don't have to bring adult-centric institutions models to the youth. You have to bring youth ways of communicating and participating. Also, another thing it's really hard to comprehend is that not every youth activist or not every young person wants to be a social or political leader. So it's really hard for some people to actually raise their voices in places like this one. So I mean, there's a lot of empowerment to working and let everyone know their voices are worth hearing, even if they don't feel like it. So there's a lot to learn in dynamics of gamifying and in places where people feel safer talking and sharing their experiences. I mean, we all know about human rights, even if theoretically we don't know about them. We have something to say about them. So it's all about making people feel safe on what they have to share. That, I think that's the most important part of it in order to get through to empowerment.
Thank you both so much. I wish I could continue to hog all of your attention, but I will open it up to the floor and allow some of our wonderful participants to share some questions. I don't see anything in the Q&A section, but I do see a number of questions in the chat, so I'll just pull some of them, and then if people want to unmute and share, we can try that as well. But to start with, Christy Cabrejas says, what are your recommendations to establish the shared humanity that we were talking about?
So some of the ways that I feel like we can establish humanity in countries that we don't necessarily agree with, number one is by respecting their country and their sovereignty. I know Americans have the American military especially has a very weird way of always wiggling their way into countries that they have no business being in. So I think that also looks like for Americans or people that are in this country or people even that are outside of this country to put pressure on us and on our government to make sure that we are not interfering in countries that we have no business being in. Restoring humanity also looks like, not stealing from underprivileged countries that have more resources than us and not actually giving them the proper compensation for that. If we are trading with our global partners and giving them the compensation that we feel that they need and deserve in order for them to be of our caliber, then why are we not doing that for countries that are rich in resources but just don't have white people in them? Plenty of the world's resources are in countries that do not have white people in them or that are not predominantly white. And those are the same countries that are being taken advantage of by these white countries, especially the white country that I live in. So when we talk about restoring humanity, it's about restoring respect to other countries and other cultures that we may not understand. It looks like actually, providing resources to the countries that need it the most, that are actually giving our world and our economy the worth and the value that it has. Because without these countries being as resource rich and without, us literally stealing them from under them, we would not be the global superpower that we are. And many other of the global superpowers in the G7 would not be the superpowers that they are if they were not doing the same exact things. So that's just a little piece on that.
Matthias, if you don't have any ideas or anything to add to Afini's point, I will pass it over to John because I know he has some questions for both of you. And I just want to say again, what a privilege it was to get to think through some of these things with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this has been an amazing talk, and I feel privileged that you have both joined us today. And so we have a couple of questions for you. Afini, starting with you, and then there's another one for Matthias, but we'll start with Afini. It's actually two questions, but I'll combine them. So the first one is, who taught you how to be inclusive and compassionate? And where does that tendency come from? And then the second part of the question is, a lot of people are angry post the murder of George Floyd and a spotlight being put on racial injustice. And this is all rightfully so that they would be upset. And there has been a new movement towards people retaliating with violence to these injustices. How do we convince people that are frustrated and upset that nonviolence is the way forward?
I'm going to start with your first question because I feel like it's going to be easier to answer for me. So who taught me to be inclusive and compassionate? I'm a Black queer woman who comes from a violently homophobic Jamaican family. So who taught me to be as inclusive and compassionate? I think that number one, that being my family structure, and number two, being one of the only dark-skinned Black people that went to all white schools for most of my life. I've spent a lot of time on the outside and knowing what it feels like to not be fully accepted for who you are or not being fully visible for who you are. And so I think that I learned how to be compassionate and inclusive from being excluded and from knowing how it feels to not feel fully loved or seen by people that you love and see. And also just being a queer person, like the queer community is very loving, very compassionate, very inclusive. Yes, there are very big issues within the queer community that need to be addressed, whether that be anti-Blackness or, anti-transness or what have you. But one thing I love about the queer community is that we literally create families where there are none. People that get kicked out of their homes, we make communities and we create love and we create compassion and we genuinely really take care of each other. And, that love and that compassion really helped me grow into who I am and help me grow my love for other people as well. So that's your first question. Your second question, this question is tough for me because I find it very hard to tell Black people to die in peace. I find it very hard to tell Palestinian people not to self-determine and retaliate against the government that is oppressing them. I find it very hard to tell Native American people not to, fight for land that is being stolen from them. But I do see that there is a path in electoral politics. I do see that there is a path in, fighting for voting rights and establishing voting rights for those people that have been marginalized in our communities, especially in America. So I would just say, for those who have the privilege to vote and for those who have the privilege of education, the end of wealth as well, the best thing that you can do is redistribute those resources, redistribute your education, redistribute your wealth, and fight for people that are not able to fight for themselves. If you see that there's a fund for your public defense in your county, donate to it, because a lot of those people that are getting public defenders are the most marginalized, the poorest in our communities. Go ahead and donate some money to the public defense offices. They need it. If there are candidates that you agree with locally that could effectuate change on your local government, on your local criminal punishment system, then you should very well fight for them. You should very well canvass for them and use your privileges in that way. But I feel like it's a very privileged standpoint to continue to tell people to deal with violence in a disproportionate way. So I'm not telling people to go out and do something crazy, but I'm also not going to continue to tell people that we should lay down and just let all these things happen to us, because honestly, if Canada started firing rockets into America, we would immediately fire rockets back. There would be no question about that. No one questions that as violence. So,
Afeni, thanks so much for your honesty and sincerity, and that was a really, really thoughtful response. And I have one more. We have a couple more questions, but I'll pivot to Matthias right now. And so this is a really great question from Karen Putney. So the question is: you invoked a place for those who are privileged, and also Afeni, you can of course chime in as well, but we'll start with Matthias. You invoked a place for those who are privileged to spend that privilege, specifically asking about place of elders and white people or anyone who has social capital that provides leverage. How and what can you use from us? Surely money, support is important, but also what about our presence? Visible, perhaps background, but here, welcome or not, but helpful. Matthias, if you want to jump in, I mean, the essence of the question is, aside from money, what else can you use from people that are in privileged positions? What would your feedback be on that?
Well, that's a really hard one. First of all, I don't believe that money is the only source of privilege. I think it's one of the lesser ones, because there are a lot of people that are underprivileged or underseen that has some capital access. So I believe that one of the most important sources of privileges is the status, and status usually or often comes from things that are not only money, but where you were raised and born, or what institutions you attend, or who's working in an alliance with you. And from that point of view, I believe that one of the best things that can happen is actually to share that leverage with underprivileged or with populations in situations of vulnerability. Like a couple of months ago, I got a phone call from an indigenous people in a town couple of hundred of kilometers away where I live from, called Andalgalá. It's a city where a mining company is actually digging gold out of the earth in a province called Catamarca. And this mining company has been working like for, I don't know, 30 years or so, but in the last 15 or 16 years, an indigenous community started acting against them in a peaceful way, always in a peaceful way, protesting against them. So they had some pretty good advances over the years, but in the last few months, this guy came in. He was supposedly this great human rights activist. He even had this diploma as a worldwide ambassador from an institution in the Netherlands. But this guy was actually hired by the mining company. And he said he was supported by the UN, and he came to talk with the community and try to bring some social, they call it social support, to what the mining company was doing. So he made up these like conversatories with the people in order to simulate everyone agreed on that. And so the community was very oppressed by this, because they didn't have ways to actually question who this person was and what they were doing. So I got the call, and to be honest, I'm not that well linked, but I had this friend in the foreign affairs ministry, and I asked about this guy, and it turned out to be this great liar who had a couple of diplomas and was a part of a couple of institutions. So we ended up kicking him out of the board, of the assessing board he had place in the Foreign Affairs Office. And I mean, most of the times it's actually sharing the leverage you had for as little as you think it might be, because most of the times institutions are well-intended and had the purpose of doing right wherever they gone. They just have the great difficulty of not knowing exactly who everyone is. I mean, after all, you don't know really who I am or who Afeni is. We could be a lot of things that aren't shown on this webinar. So I believe that most of the time is sharing those privileges and leverage with people who are in the conflict, who are in the vulnerability situation.
Thank you so much, Matthias. Afini, did you want to jump in and give feedback on this question?
Yeah, I think, I think the question really is just like, how visible are you willing to be for these issues? Like, white people and people that are connected have a lot more resources and a lot more, they can pick up a phone and do a lot more things, with their privilege than a lot of Black people, Indigenous people, other marginalized groups can. And with that privilege, knowing that you can pick up the phone, knowing that you can use these resources for whatever if you can use them for, your white brother's son, then you can definitely use them for, marginalized and poor people in your communities. So it's just really like, what do you have to offer that could be of benefit to Black people or to marginalized or Indigenous people? And as a white person, trust me, you probably have a lot more than you think. So it's really about taking that inventory, taking that stock, and seeing what you have the capacity to offer, and then making those offers.
That's Matthias and Afini. That's super helpful. Afini, in particular, when you sort of paralleled it to, how you might help a family member or, a friend's son or friend's daughter. That parallel really resonates. And as a white man, that makes sense to me. That clicked in my head where I said, yeah, okay. So I have one more question for you, and then we'll wrap up. And the question is, how do we socialize youth that have been radicalized into violence as the only form of their livelihood? The example they use, and I'm assuming this person is in Africa, raiding rebel activity and thuggery. And then they close with, this is very common in Africa. But what would your response be to that?
Crime and violence is a socioeconomic problem. I know here in America, every Black liberation protest that you see is an act of self-defense. Like, I'll just bring it back to America, bring it back here, because that's just where my knowledge base is. There were 58 race riots from 1919 to 1925. Those were all instigated by white terrorists. So if Black people act in defense to that terror, automatically we're violent. The terrorism that initially sparked the event was not violent, but our proportionate and appropriate reaction of self-defense is. And it's the same way that I see it for pretty much like any group that is being oppressed by white supremacy. There are layers and layers and layers of violence that we all live under. Like, as a Black woman in America, I am 3 times more likely to die than a white woman on a delivery table. You want to know why that is? Because only 5.4% of doctors are Black in America. And that means only 3% of them are Black women. That is violence to me. That is something that I feel like I need to fight back against. That is something that I feel like I need to, defend myself against. And then on top of that, I have the violence in the education system that marginalizes a lot of people that didn't have the privilege that I did to go to white schools. And then on top of that, you have police brutality. And then on top of that, you have blatant racism. And then on top of that, you have the stripping of voting rights. You have 1 in 3 Black men that can expect to be incarcerated in this country. All of these forms of violence are things that when Black people get angry and they act out on that anger, that is self-defense. So it is just to continue to tell oppressed people to placate their oppressors, for me, does not seem right, because for over 100 years in this country, we have been doing all the things that we have been told that we need to do. We have been letting paperwork tell us what our civil rights are, where we can be and what we can do for so long. How come it is violent for us to defend ourselves, but it is not violent for America to bomb countries all the time? All the time. We spent $10 billion a month during the Iraq war, bombing civilians. That is violence. So I just feel like when we redefine violence, when we talk about what safety looks like, we really need to see what the root of that violence is and how to, dismantle that, because we cannot continue to tell people to peacefully go back and forth with their oppressors when their oppressors are not being peaceful with them.
Thank you so much, Afini. Matthias, did you want to answer this question as well?
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that America hasn't spent 10 billion a month bombing Iraq. United States has. It's not all. Argentina doesn't have anything to do with the Iraq conflict, first of all. Secondly, about how to... I believe that first, the root of all of it, it's trying to understand what makes someone go into radicalization in order to bring them back to another way of peace building. During the 70s in all of Latin America, there had been a lot of radicalization that had led us to military dictatorships and political systems that perdures even to nowadays. Colombia in the past 45 days had some protests, and they were brutally oppressed by the police and the armed forces, and the whole system that is built around it makes that a really silent situation, because great papers around the world and journals doesn't write about the Colombian situation, and if they do, they talk about these radicalized youth that are trying to overthrow the government. But what they don't say is that youth doesn't have a voice. They don't say that during the 2020 72 massacres happened against civilian population, youth, and environmental activists in the southwestern part of Colombia. When you hear about people fighting back in the neighborhoods in Argentina against the police, you don't actually learn how police usually arrives in a neighborhood and they start questioning everyone and how willingly they are to open fire against population. There's even a concept for it over here. It's called easy trigger. They're really willing to use the trigger against people as a first option. But I do believe that in order to fight back radicalization, the first part of it, it's trying to understand what it's oppressing the people and what pushes them towards radicalization. What parts of this structure are the most unfair ones? How does that make people feel? And I do believe that there is a path to peace building through all of this. Some of the most oppressed situations over the years had shown us a peace-building path towards it. Quakerism, it's a really great example about it. How Jewish people acted during the World War II, it's really a way of understanding that. What needs to be understood also is that there are institutions that for hundreds of years had oppressed all the people, and really trying to understand what leads those organizations and institutions are a way to fight them back. Fighting back a situation of oppression, it's not only a matter of physical fighting back, but also and there's a need to be smarter than them. Trying to think that something can't be fight back or overthrown, it's a lie. All institutions tend to fall over the time. You just need to find their weak point and how to fight back that situation of injustice. And I do believe that places like this one are the best way we can find for that fighting back, because when you start finding fellows all over the world that are facing similar situations, and when you can share that fight and you can share that voice and bring underprivileged or vulnerability populations' voices over to the table and make them be heard. There's a lot to it. I'll just close with this. The Colombian situation was especially dangerous because there was this mediatic fence, we call it. I mean, greatest media in all of Latin America wouldn't talk about it. And literally, there was police and armed forces opening fire against population. So what they did, what Colombian youth did, was starting to share the images and the videos through Instagram. And those Instagram videos were shared with Latin American youth for over like 10 days. And we just threw the fence down with rocks through social media. We started like reacting in social media. We stormed into a live broadcast of the Security Council with the hashtag SOS Colombia. And there were literally like dozens of thousands of comments in the broadcasting saying SOS Colombia. And in the end, almost every government in Latin America at least condemned what the government was doing. So I believe that sharing and trying to understand what people are living, it's key to fighting radicalization.
Thank you so much, Matthias. Matthias and Afini, I feel like we could talk about any one of these subjects with both of you for several hours. I'm almost feeling like we need some sort of follow-up at some point, and just so grateful to have you. I did want to give you, we're about to close, we're running out of time. I'd love to give you just, if you have any closing remarks, if there's anything you want to share with the group, we'd love to hear it from you. So Afini, do you want to kick us off or close us out?
The best way to establish safety and peace in marginalized neighborhoods is to provide resources to those marginalized neighborhoods. The best way to actually, provide safety and stability is to not provoke violence in these neighborhoods, period. So just like I grew up in a white neighborhood that did not have a bunch of violent militant police officers running around it. We had community centers, we had programs, we had after school programs, we had all that good stuff. We want all of those same things to be packaged and put into a Black community, because that's where real safety and real sustainable peace comes from.
Thank you so much, Afini. And Matthias, did you want to close out with any words?
Just saying that I do believe generally that spaces like these are the most important for peace building all over the region and the world. One of the hardest challenges we have to face, its voice is not being heard. It's that realities, well, when you hear the reality someone is living, it makes you feel closer. You're aware of it and you know what is happening. So maybe an invitation is that you would follow in social media people that are on those fights and that are facing them every day, not just BTS and the Kardashians, but I mean all people that are facing challenges every day, at least to remind that you are living privileges and that there's something worthy you can do with them.
Thank you so much, Afeni and Matias. And so just a few words from Peace Direct. Once again, we really appreciate the courageous, meaningful work both of you are doing, and we hope to stay connected. And I do think we need to have some sort of follow-up on this discussion. And I just wanted to close with a few ways you can get involved with Peace Direct. So number one, it's appropriate that we had Afeni and Matias on today. We are having a youth peace builder campaign going on right now. And we need your help. We need support. So if you'd consider donating, we'd really appreciate that. The next thing is, if you're a student and you want to get involved, more involved with Peace Direct, please contact Oscar Lester. That's oscar.lester@peacedirect.org. And lastly, just remember to follow us on social media at Peace Direct on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Once again, a big shout out to Afini and Matthias. So grateful to have you on today. And to all the attendees, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for being a part of the peace building community, the Peace Direct community, and we hope to see you sometime soon.